Yay Networks.
Welcome to the Great Girlfriends podcast, where we discuss life, love, laughter, and everything in between. I'm your host, Sybil, and I can't wait for you to hear all of the Great Girlfriend magic on today's show. So without further ado, grab something great to drink, grab your pen and your paper, and get ready for this week's episode. Enjoy! Happy Wednesday, great girlfriend, and happy International Women's History Month. I am so incredibly excited to leap into this episode for this week. And I'm also excited to have quality time with someone who is going to really help us detangle the wires on our marriage, money, and mental. Do women have to make choices? I'm so excited because our guest today, Chantel Cohen, is the founder and CEO of CWC Coaching and Therapy, which provides therapy and coaching services to entrepreneurs and professionals alike. In particular, Chantel is on a mission to empower entrepreneurs of color, women business owners, and founding duos to create the lives they always imagined for themselves. So if you are in any of those categories, which great girlfriends, I know you are, you do fit in many of those categories. If not two or three, I want you to grab your pen and paper, and I want you to get really excited because Chantel is here to help us navigate this kind of complex conversation. So thank you so much for being here, Chantel.
You are so welcome, Sybil. I'm excited to be here. And actually, you did a great job with my bio. You did
Did
a
I?
great job.
Okay.
Yeah, people don't always kind of understand what I do. And I say I help people become one again so that their lives have more synergy. And if you're a founder or professional, we do that coaching therapy hybrid, and we work on yourself, your relationship to your career, and your relationship to your significant other. And then I work with couples and co-founders in relationship distress. And so we work on, if they're co-founders and they're married, we may be working on how do they, as a couple, how do they have a marriage, and then how do they show up as co-founders, and
Yeah.
that can oftentimes look very different. And sometimes we have just co-founders who aren't married, but they're not getting along, and so we help with that. We also work with teams as well.
Oh, that's so good to hear. I think I'm particularly excited about this conversation because, Chantel, for so long on the podcast, we have talked about entrepreneurship, we've talked about business, we've talked about wellness, we've talked about the intersection of these things, we've talked about marriage. I'm 17 years, almost 17 years into my marriage, and we've talked about the idea of, and even having children. I have a 14 and I have an 11 now. My kids have grown up on this podcast, so it's been 7 years of having this podcast and having my life evolve in front of and with our community. And so there is this idea that you have to live your life in compartments, and it comes up quite often with women who have heavily vested themselves into their career, and then they look up and go, wait a minute, where's my love life? Or wait a minute, time is fleeting and I want to have other facets of life. Maybe I'd like to have a family, maybe I'd like to have children, maybe I'd like to, purchase homes and do things that show the fullness of who I am. But I've been living in a box. And so I want to kind of
Yeah.
talk to you. Do you hear this? Is this like first time, or have you?
No, I hear it a lot, and
Yeah.
like yourself, I'm an entrepreneur, and I'm going on 29 years in my marriage, and 30, almost 35 years living together. 3 kids, 23-year-old who just graduated from college, an 18-year-old who's about to embark in college in Amsterdam,
Wow.
and a 2 boys, and then our last one's a girl. So she's
Okay.
um, pretty incredible. She's a 10th grader, and so
Wow.
managing, and my husband's an entrepreneur, but he's also the CFO of my company. So yeah, I know what
Uh-huh.
it means. I know what
Uh-huh.
it's, how do you manage it all?
Yeah.
And so tell me, you ask a specific question and I'll answer it, but that's something that I work on all the time
Okay.
with
Okay.
women especially. I'll be honest with you, I have very few men who are trying to figure out how to make their lives to have more work-life integration.
Isn't that something? The
It's like
questions
I
that
don't
we
have
ask.
any, in
Yeah, yeah.
fact.
Yeah, because we ask the questions but tell me why you think that's so.
Well, I think that women's roles have really changed.
Okay.
And I think men are going through a bit of an identity crisis because women are not needing men to necessarily earn, to be the sole income earner. A lot of women. There are some women who take a more traditional role, and that's fine as well. And yet, we don't need you to, fund our lives. We can earn
Right.
this ourselves. And that's been happening, especially for Black women. This has been from the moment that we arrived in this country by force. We've had to figure out how to do it ourselves and how to create family out of almost nothing. And so that's been at the top of our minds for generations.
Yeah.
And I think men, it's been a little different, obviously through no fault of their own, but especially Black men trying to figure out, how do I show up? And when I've got a woman who's fully capable and ready to take on the world, and now they're having to question, what does she need? Who can I be in this relationship? How do I show up? And women need to be a part of that conversation. And I think a lot of us are.
Mhm, mhm. I oftentimes have that conversation with, my husband. I'm like, "So are your friends talking about this stuff?" And he's like, "No." Like, it's so interesting, but what I do know is that we are the keeper of details, and we are the anchors of our households in terms of creating like a full experience when it comes to integrating and intersecting all the things that are happening in our worlds. Women do that. We bring it all to one table. Men tend to leave them in separate tables, and so I feel like there is a couple things happening. We have this I do want to address that there is a mental health crisis happening in our country,
The pink
specifically.
pandemic, right?
Yes,
Especially for women. Yep.
yes. And so, if you kind of let's layer that the crisis of now we've got high levels of anxiety and depression that are happening right now, alongside demands that we already placed on ourselves. I imagine that the pressure points are even more tender than they were before. So, how can women who already lived under pressure, who are already under pressure, and then there were layers of new complex mental health issues that arose after the pandemic and during, and so now we're living in this heightened state of sensitivity. How do we create, I don't even know if it's a normal, but how do we create a new space in our minds where we can fulfill life and not feel like we're constantly pushing to do and be more?
I so first and foremost, I would say that this what happened during the pandemic is very real, and
Yeah.
there was a load that women took on that men just did not. And I'm not, any men that are listening to the Great Girlfriends, I'm not saying that men are completely absent, but we do know from the data that women took on the lion's share of that. And so what happened was is the anxiety increased for everyone because a pandemic is a real threat, right? But
Right.
then economically, what does it mean? How do I go about the business of doing work, raising children, even finding a partner? And so all these things, and let's not forget like the social unrest that's been happening for hundreds of years, but people are starting to see that this is actually what we've always known as a community, right?
Mhm,
And
mhm.
so layer that on, and so we see those images on TV.
Yeah.
It also creates this heightened sense, and so it's a physiological response. And so now we're starting to worry about these real threats.
Yeah.
However, every time we watch a show or read or something that reinforces this mindset that it's all crashing down on us,
Mhm.
it creates these neural pathways, right?
Mhm,
These
mhm,
neural pathways, it becomes easier and easier to become worried. And so you hear people saying, "Oh my gosh, I never used to worry, and now I'm worried all the time." And everything's going well in my life, and I'm still feeling worried. It's
mhm.
because it actually is a brain experience. It's happening in the brain. And so those neurons are firing and now it's easier. So think about it this way. You know somebody who gets angry really easy and you're like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa. Why you get
Right.
so
Yeah.
angry?" Like the anger doesn't match the situation,
Yeah.
but it's happening quicker.
Got a person in my
It's
mind right now.
right. It's because those neural pathways are well worn. It's
Okay.
easy. Remember, like, we don't have to remember about how to ride a bike. We learned how to do it. And
Mhm.
once we get on a bike, those neurons are firing. It's a well worn path. And
Mhm.
now we're on automatic pilot. That happens with worry and anxiety too.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
some of it is very real, and some of it is a chemical process, a physiological process that's happening in the brain. And so what
Mm.
we want to
Mm.
do is we want to disrupt that process.
Mhm. Mhm.
So I don't know if that makes sense. So it's not only just that it's chemical, it's happening in our bodies. We want to
Mhm.
disrupt that, but we also want to look at what's happening for a woman, and I'm going to say for women in their lives. What are they doing that increases the stress? How can we do things to minimize the stress, to minimize the load, to reframe how she's seeing the world so that we can change those neural pathways and change behavior and change emotion. So we what we do is we do therapy with the business coaching lens. So we're
Mhm.
also looking at what's happening at work for her as well. So this thing that that are women are experiencing is legit. It's real, and some of it is also happening in the brain. And we want to make sure that it's
Mhm.
almost like a bio physiological sort of model and a social model as well. And so we want to disrupt what you're watching on TV, create new neural pathways. So I give people strategies. So if you've got a woman who said, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe that I'm in this position," we start looking at, well, what's possible? You want to
Mhm.
start, we want to start there. But have I answered your question? I feel like
Yeah.
I took you in the bio route, but to let you know that there's a biopsychosocial model to all
Yeah.
of this.
What you also gave me, so twofold. Yes, you did answer because there's a lot that's happening in the environment, and then there's a lot that's happening internally. Um, and
Hmm.
and though we cannot change the environment necessarily, right?
You can
The world
sometimes.
came home and every and so now, but as we reacclimate into the world, and so many of us have found our way back and are feeling great about it, there are still disruptive spaces in our mind, that places in our mind that we need to disrupt and give ourselves permission to free ourselves from. I'm also curious, Chantel, on whether or not we inherit this way of thinking, this way of moving and worrying and fearing, and if our moms or if women in our life, we're hyper reactive in moments of volatility or sensitivity, do we then become women who are super sensitive? Or also, if we have seen, are we triggered by certain stages of life? If we've seen women in our family go through divorce in their mid 40s, or even hit cancer, or have, get laid off from jobs. Do those things trigger us to have these worries that, okay, when I approach this time frame, here I go. Am I up against the same things? Are any of those true for us, do you think?
It is
Okay.
because we have these influences around us. And oftentimes our sense of self is developed because we have this interaction between
Yeah.
us and another person. Like many of like Sybil, you're attractive because you've gotten feedback from people who tell
Yeah.
you that. Like if you're on an island, so there are all these positives, right?
Yeah.
That we get, but there's also some models that aren't so positive. And so if we see someone in our lives reacting to stress in a way, or our parent has gone through a trauma and let's say they've gone through a divorce and now we're having trouble with our spouse, and remembering that time as a kid or a
Right.
teenager and having that traumatic experience, it's there. It's kind of
Mhm,
almost like in our cells, and we're
mhm,
wondering why we're so frightened. We're
mhm.
wondering why. And I have folks who will say, "Oh, well, you know what? If we have to divorce, we just have to divorce." And I'm like, "Well, gosh, there's been no talk
Yeah.
of divorce. Where is
There's
this coming
options.
from?"
Yeah,
Yeah, where is this coming from?
yeah,
Well,
yeah.
I just saw these, people staying too long, or I don't want to be in a relationship if somebody doesn't want to be, and it's like they're reacting to that past experience.
Yes.
And so I always tell people we have to look at that, because you wouldn't go into a job interview saying, "You know what? I don't want you to look at any of my past experience. That doesn't matter." Of course you're going to look at that. And so we
Right.
do that when we're trying to take a deep dive in how do we make your life better? What are the life lessons that you've learned? And how have those lessons, good and not so good, affected how you show up and how you view your current state? And so it's
Yeah.
super important. So we take a deep dive into that as well. So
Mhm.
it makes Sybil really, really great question.
Because I think sometimes people um, miss the link there, and or lack the correlation between, wait, I grew up with this environment. I saw, my mom react a certain way or make an exit, or and
Hmm.
and so many things are conditional, right? There's the times are different, the circumstances, the spouse, the mindset. There's so many things that we have to say, wait a minute, and it may not have even served them. It may have been a way of reacting that did not serve who they are or even what they desired. But I've learned in marriage specifically, um, my observation. I've only been married once, happily, I'll say.
I
my
hear you. Me
observation,
too. We're
my
we're we're
observation
very fortunate.
so fortunate is that when people have disagreements in marriage, they think it's an end, or they fight to exit versus
Mhm.
fighting to stay. And people ask me all the time, well, how you and Kwaku figure this out? I'm like, because we're fighting to stay. Everything we're fighting is for the man. We're not fighting to
Exactly.
I'm not fighting to prove why I shouldn't be married to him, or why he's not the one for me, or why all men are a certain thing, or why I should just focus on my career and my kids. I'm fighting for the legacy of our union, which is togetherness. So it's a different type of fight. I'm fighting I'm going in to keep something alive versus to kill it. And
Right.
I hope for every woman that's listening, they can understand that it's okay. For me, it's okay to fight if you're fighting for something, but to
Sybil, you're
fight.
saying some wise words. Yes. If
Yeah.
you're gonna fight, it's a hard fight to undo it. Why not work towards something you're fighting for to make it better? The
Yes.
and
Yes.
so when
We
people
do
say
it in
it's
our
hard,
careers, Chantel. We do.
oh
Oh,
yeah,
we are good for it.
absolutely. We
So,
acquire new skills. We know that
yeah,
when they've been outdated, we're not sort of sitting around on wanting to be right
yeah,
as much as, hey, okay, I've got to improve. If I want to be here in my career, I know that these are the steps I need to take. But
absolutely.
there's all sorts of psychology behind why someone may get triggered in their relationship, and way
Yeah.
one person may withdraw. And so having that, almost like that covenant that
Mhm.
you and your husband have around, no, we're working to stay in.
Yeah.
I mean, already foundationally, you're at a different place.
Yeah. I do wonder too, Chantel, if there's any data around women who have business coaches versus women who have relationship coaches, or career coaches versus women who pursue relationship coaching. Do you find that you see um, the numbers skew higher on either side for you?
Honestly, I don't have that data, but here's what I'll say is I think we find meaning and improvement where we can. And
Yeah.
I know a lot of good relationship coaches, and I know a lot of really good therapists. I think where coaches get into trouble is they don't have the psychological training.
Yeah.
And much of how we show up in relationship has to do with attachment theory. And
Mhm.
we're doing so just to give you an idea, for my training with relationships,
Mhm.
I did 2.5 years training, and I
Wow.
had to go in front of a group of people led by a therapist, and I had recordings, and they would like tear them apart, like, this is what you have to do.
Yeah.
But but there's a big caveat. I've seen some outstanding relationship coaches.
Yeah.
I really have. And so I don't want anybody to leave the podcast thinking that I'm saying only a therapist can do this. I think
Right,
that
right.
because I'm a real proponent of coaching,
Mhm.
I guess the difference is my team and I, we work on those three areas and we're thera coaches, we can
Mhm.
do both. And so
Mhm.
that's the difference, is also a year training in business coaching. And so having all these and coaches, it's an unregulated profession.
Mhm.
So
So let me
that's the
ask you
only
this.
caveat.
Yeah, in terms of women having, whether or not women have to choose between, their business or their love life, what's your, I feel like I have your take on it, but I'm kind of want to know, can women have it all? And like, what are a couple of keys to having it all in terms of having both business and love life?
I never recommend ever that people just focus on their careers. You're going to
Mhm.
think this is kind of crazy, but my daughter, who's 16, and she's like, "Mom, I don't think I want to date any boys because I just want to wait until I get to college." And I thought, okay, that's a really great idea. But I tell her, Sophia, you if you want to learn about relationships, like, people, they they want to bypass the whole concept of dating,
Yeah.
and this is the training ground. This is how
Yeah.
it's done.
Yeah.
It doesn't work any other way. And because my millennials, especially my millennials, and I'm starting to get some Gen Zers, they
Mhm.
don't have the laboratory that maybe you had, Sybil. I know that you're younger, but I know that we went outside and we played, and I
Absolutely.
knew I developed all sorts of EQ.
Yep.
So they're
For sure.
missing out on these transferable skills that were happening. I knew that I wasn't great at baseball. I was going to be last picked. I had to learn to deal with failure, but I got
Yeah.
really great at kickball and dodgeball.
Yeah.
I knew that by the time I was 8 years old, I knew I had a gift for helping people in relationships, because my girlfriends would get in arguments and I was the one to say, "Oh, can you make up with this person?"
Yeah.
The kids nowadays don't have that. I had hours,
Mhm.
hours and hours. Playing was a job.
Yeah.
And but we didn't realize that we were developing good relationship management,
Yeah.
social awareness. And
Absolutely.
now you've got all these people who are scared socially what to do.
Mhm.
And so now they're saying, okay, their parents, I'm too afraid for my kid to go outside. They don't have that. They get minimal social interactions through school. It's all sort
Yeah.
of prescriptive. And so now they're like, I'm not going to have relationships. I'm not going to date. Well, damn, by the time you get to 30, you've had very little
Yeah.
experience
That's
in
right.
relationships, and also their transferable skills. We
For
learn
sure.
how to use this and get along with colleagues. All these things
Absolutely.
are transferable skills. And so, no, do not hold off on relationships and dating for your
Yeah.
career. No. I'm going to tell
Yeah.
it, it's not healthy. And we see women who date, I mean, I'm sorry, women who work more than 55 hours. In 2019, there was it was in the Journal of Epidemiology and Community Health. They are more prone to depression, higher rates of
Mm.
depression. They have more trouble like navigating differences. They have issues with self-worth. And so
Oh,
when
wow.
all of it's just coming from work, work isn't
Mhm.
gonna, if you get in the hospital, if you have a flat tire,
Yeah,
You know,
work's not gonna
no,
make it.
no, it's not. It's not.
Gonna be
So,
there.
yeah, we need to be able
Mhm.
to manage both. We talk about strategies for developing time to give over space for that. But when you
Yeah,
do, you're also really growing your career. You're growing your EQ as well,
yeah.
which we know that when you get into upper management, it counts for about 58%
Mhm.
of what you
Wow.
like. You're hired
Yeah.
as a subject matter expert, but the higher you go, it's about the management of people.
Mhm, mhm, mhm. Yeah,
So
you know
anyway, I
what's
feel
interesting is
passionately about this. Sorry,
no,
Sybil.
because but when you think about you're absolutely right in terms of how it shows up because, um, everything that I've learned about, through my dating history, I appropriate towards understanding how men navigate decision making. And so in my career or even in my life, when I'm able, when I'm relating with other males in my life, I have a deeper understanding of how they make their decisions or what influences them. And it supports me as I'm engaging. If I'm going to be a strong leader to someone, or if I'm going to be a strong sister, or
Mhm.
a colleague in some way, or if I'm pitching something very important to a man, dating history has helped me understand some of the wiring in there that you don't
Yes.
get when you're only operating in one facet of relationship. It's just like
Right.
becoming a mother. I understand my childhood, my 5-year-old to my 0 to 11-year-old self. I get her much more now. I also understand my mother much more because I'm now sitting in mother's shoes. I now understand a lot of what my dad may have experienced watching my husband be a father to a
Mhm.
daughter. There's so much that you see when you interact in different ways. And so I think like you're saying, it's like um if women, great girlfriends, that if you can find a way to make that investment, it's not just in the romantic space, it's really in relationship building
Yes.
holistically. And yeah, I
Yes.
really do. I do believe that. Chantel, so you talk about carving out space for it. And I'm pretty sure you hear women saying, "I don't have time." What I don't have time. Is it a waste of time? Is it even worth my time, right? Because for women who are very focused on their careers, um, I think we could safely say they're very outcome oriented. I want a result. I put time in, I want something to match it. And with dating, that experience is cataloged, but it's not necessarily you're getting a husband on date one. So it's kind of we hear a lot. You're hearing is it, I don't have the time, but is it worth my time? What are the things that you're hearing from women as they are saying? You're saying carve out time. They're going. What are they saying to you?
Well, I think that a lot of women, they're wanting, they're like, I'm ready now, right?
Yeah.
And so therefore it should come. But for most people, they've dated, they've had some experiences, and it also grows them as a person. So I would say if you've just given over to career, those folks tend to be a little less sharp. Their EQ isn't as sharp,
Mhm.
and they tend to make assumptions about relationships. And I see women going in like, "Oh my God, it's been 2 years. We got to get married." I'm like, "Well, 2 years, that isn't the standard. Tell me about how well you're communicating. Tell me about how well you're problem solving. What's your vision for the future isn't aligned with his,
Mhm.
right?"
Mhm.
But it's like, "Oh, I've got to have a baby. I've got to do this." And so one is, if you're too outcome driven, you miss out on the qualitative stuff that is really what's important to a relationship.
That's good. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I love that. So, okay, for the great girlfriend who's listening, who's saying, easy for you to say, you've been married for an eternity. You have 3 children who you love and adore. You're
I have a
practicing
business.
you have
I
a
have all
business.
this. have all the things that they say that they're wanting.
They're
Yeah,
like,
you do too.
"You're
Yeah,
practicing this, Chantel, on a regular basis.
I
You
am.
don't know my story." So it's easy for you to say, what would you say to her, the one who's holding on to the idea that you don't know her story, so you don't understand what her experience is like because you don't know her story, and her story is one that would is very different from yours.
I would say you probably don't know my story either. And
Fair.
secondly, because
Yeah.
I think there is this thing that we do, we compare ourselves to others without the
Yeah.
whole picture, right?
Yeah.
And then secondly, I want to know her story. That's
Yeah.
the whole point, is understanding, walk in her shoes so that I can understand how to help. But I
Yeah.
will tell you what the great equalizer is I only have the same 24 hours that everybody else has.
That's a fact.
Yeah, there's
Yeah.
and so there are strategies and ways, and there's lots of research about how we go about the business of work, how we become more effective, how we create and carve out time for ourselves for self-care, and how that ultimately boosts energy instead of working to time, working to your energy and using that as a
Mhm.
way to increase the effectiveness. There's all sorts of things. I promise you, I live it. I
Yeah.
live it. And people always ask me, "Well, how do you have so much time for that?" And when I start telling people what I do, it's a strategy. It truly is a strategy. So if you're outcome based and if you follow the strategy, it works.
Mhm.
It
Mhm. Mhm.
truly works. And so I say this and it's really unpopular, but the quality of your life is often dictated by the habits that you cultivate and the decisions that you make. And so when those habits support a decision to become an entrepreneur,
Mhm.
it can be extremely rewarding and
Yeah.
very gratifying when you're making a decision and you have a goal towards being a particular kind of parent, that when you start getting synergistic around that and managing your energy and using that to build the life that you want, it can be incredibly powerful. And
Mhm.
that's how you see people who it feels like they have it all, but really what they've done is they've made a decision about what's important, and then they have developed a strategy and they develop
Mhm.
habits around that strategic plan, just like you would do initiatives around
Yeah.
your business or if you're working for a corporation. What I find is that sometimes people want the answers, but it's harder for them to stick with the habits that will cultivate that.
Mm.
And that's why diets and things, it's like, okay, we all know that if we if we move our bodies more and eat less, we're
Yeah.
going to have the outcome, right?
Yeah.
But there are different strategies and ways to do that. It could be intermittent fasting,
Right.
right? Or for some people, it could be, I can't go those long periods. I may need to have portion control and do it. So there are different strategies that work for different people.
Right.
But the fundamental thing is true. If you don't stick to the strategy, you won't get the outcome that you want.
Mhm. Mhm. Mm. So good. Oh my goodness. Okay, Chantel, I could have you here all day. I truly appreciate you dropping so much wisdom for our listeners and really talking um, so genuinely and intentionally around emotional EQ. And my hope is that great girlfriends, as you listen, you understand that your story doesn't disqualify you; it qualifies you
Oh,
to.
absolutely.
Yeah, right. And it gives you space to speak to your, career and your love life as you choose, but understanding, like like Chantel's saying, that having the fundamentals of having a strategy that you are consistently devoted to, I think is the game changer. That commitment creates that momentum, and that's where you see results. And if we quit too soon, you never get to see the victory of fulfilling whatever that thing is that you're seeking. And we do it so passionately in our businesses, and even in our friendships, and we cheer other women forward to do it. Now we got to grab our pom poms and do it for ourselves. So,
Right.
and that's where we take that power of living out someone's old story and the stuff that we inherited, and living according to those boundaries from people who taught us really bad things that we don't have to take on, and we get to take on a new story and create new chapters. So thank you, Chantel, so much for your wisdom. Where can the great girlfriends keep up with you?
They can go to chantelcohen.com, and that's with a
Okay.
C, Chantel, Cohen, Cohen.com.
Hmm.
Or you can go to at Chantel Cohen on Instagram,
Okay.
or working with Chantel Cohen on TikTok. And I'm also on LinkedIn as well. I'm kind of everywhere.
You're everywhere. Yes, I love it.
And I have a YouTube channel.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for being here, Chantel. I am so grateful. Great girlfriends, thank you for listening today. Definitely go follow Chantel, check out her work. And if you're in the Atlanta area, or I'm pretty sure you book virtually,
Oh,
um,
yeah, we see people all over the country.
yeah, yeah, book a session to dive a little deeper and invest in your emotional EQ. So thank you so much, Chantel.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. All right, great girlfriends, did you enjoy this week's episode of the podcast? If so, would you please give us your amazing review on iTunes? Every single review helps another great girlfriend get plugged into the podcast and the community. Speaking of community, make sure you join our Facebook group at The Great Girlfriends, follow us on Instagram at The Great Girlfriends, and on Twitter at _great GFS. I'm Sybil Amuti, and I'm out. Peace.